Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of Her Faith Inspires podcast, where we take cultural issues and we tackle them with biblical truth. I have a guest on for you today, and I'm really excited to introduce you all to her. Actually, I guess you say we work together, but I never get to actually work in the same office or room with the people I work with because we're remote. So we see each other when we can. And I actually saw Ty in person when I was passing through the last CIA in where was it, New Mexico, in July. So we were talking, and Ty has a YouTube channel and she's on Instagram. I'm like, why don't I know about this? And she talks about a lot of great things, great topics that I was like, we got to have you on Her Faith Inspires podcast. So lo and behold, we actually got a day to do this. So Ty, welcome to the podcast. I'm so excited to share you with my listeners for sure.
Thank you so much for having me. Yeah, CIA, I'm glad that we had the pleasure of meeting each other again, because I think this was the second time that we were there at the same time, right?
I think so. Did you go to the one last year too, last summer?
Yeah, it was Ohio? It was
Yes.
Cincinnati, Ohio. Yeah, I was at that one too.
Yes. Okay. So, and that's funny too, because that was my second one. My first time was 2021. And what's funny is I've had people on my podcast from CIA, but I didn't ever talk to them while I was at CIA because it's like, yeah, like, you know how I don't know about you, but I sat in the same seat all the time. And so it's like, people don't really shift too much. And then if you're all going to different like classes, I mean, and then you're so busy, but you do talk to a lot of people at lunch and stuff, but it's like, you don't really get to see what everyone's doing. You know what I mean? So I didn't even get to like know you till after CIA.
Well, sometimes it just happens like that, but God's providence. I'm like, God, I trust you. I think it happened when it was supposed to happen,
Yeah, for sure. Well, I've had Chris from Good Tube Kids. Apparently he was at CIA last year. Don't remember seeing him. Then I had Janelle, who was with me in 2021. She was barely on my podcast this year. And I'm like, she's awesome. Yeah, she worked with Natasha doing the GAP program. Oh no, Janelle Wood. I think the Janelle Wood, I met her last year too, and she was on my podcast this year. Yeah, so it's like funny how it's like, man, you guys, we got together after CIA, but that is what CIA is for too, is like running into each other, making those connections. And then you know how it is. There's a great group of people that go to CIA.
Awesome. And for me, because I'm not like a extroverted person, but I can go there and feel comfortable because people really want to like communicate and what's the word? Network.
Yes.
And do ministry projects together. So it's really cool.
Yeah, it is. So tell us more about you and what you do specifically, like in this whole apologetics arena and just in life, whatever you want to tell us about yourself.
Sure. Okay. So I started my YouTube channel back in, I think it was 2019, which feels like yesterday, which that wasn't that long ago, but then it kind of feels like it was a long time ago. So I talk about pop culture from a Christian perspective. So things that I see are kind of going viral on social media that interest me. There's just so many different pockets of social media. You can't keep up with it all, but the stories that kind of interest me, normally stories that are going on within the Black church or the gospel music industry, I'll talk about that and give my 2 cents. Not sure how much that's worth to anybody else, but I'm like, hey, I'm going to use my voice in this platform to talk about what I want to talk about, right? But I also talk about things having to do with apologetics, both mainstream apologetics, but more so urban apologetics. So when I say urban apologetics, I mean like apologetics that's geared towards cults that are growing in inner cities and urban cities. A lot of times these are cults that particularly affect the Black community, but it's not just for the Black community. But so that's what my YouTube channel is about. I love it. I'm a regular lay person. I go to church just like everybody else. I don't have a seminary degree, at least not yet. But I just like to read books. And the reason I got started in this is just because I had questions that were hard for me to answer that people who didn't share my same faith kind of challenged me on. So the next thing I know, I'm starting a YouTube channel and going to different conferences and looking at different videos of scholars and YouTube apologists. And so that's all been a little piece of my story, but I'm sure we'll get into more of the nuts and bolts of it as we talk.
Yeah, absolutely. It's very interesting, like how I love that people get involved in things just out of the need. Okay. Like, okay, there's a need out there, but also I need to know how to, how to have these conversations. Like if we're Christians, how do we lead people to Christ through our faith? And that's why you started a YouTube channel. So a lot of times people are like, how did you do it? How, what are you doing? You're like, I'm just a average, everyday, ordinary person. And people don't think that about somebody like you with a YouTube channel. And you have a very, you have a good foundation with your subscribers and your base and stuff. So it's not like you don't have a big following at the same time when you're like, I'm just an ordinary person doing this. So very cool. And it makes me like so excited to talk about this. So we're actually asking, you talk about a cultural topic and what people are talking about today. And it's like, it's funny because on, being on the white side of things, people are like, oh my gosh, like, how do I answer the question? And so I'm like, let's talk to Ty about it. Cause I love your CIA presentation. Love it. I've watched it twice. You sent it to me and I'm like, that's why we're talking about this too. So we're starting off with a heavy hitter. Like, is Christianity a white man's religion? So when I first heard people start to say that, basically the last couple years, right, it's been pretty heated with the racial divide and things like that. So more so in the last couple years when I started to hear it, I'm like, wait a second, like Christianity came from the Middle East. Like it's you know what I mean? Like how in the world where did this come from? So first let's talk about that. And what do people mean when they say that, like it is a white man's religion?
There is for some reason, people believe that when they see those pictures of white Jesus, that is actually what he looks like, that's a representation of the entire Christian faith. So I think pictures have contributed to this problem. And also because like we live in the West and Christianity it's in our culture, to say whether or not Christianity is, or excuse me, America is a Christian country, I guess that's debatable, but we still have all of these Christian principles within the fabric of our culture. So I think what we're seeing now is like social media. We talk about how like the transgender movement, a lot of that is a social contagion. Like 5 years ago, 10 years ago, this was not a huge thing. And I was like, whoa, where did this come from? Well, I think the same thing is happening with this Christianity is the white man's religion. More people are exposed to different belief systems and worldviews and starting to question their faith and starting to hear like some of their favorite celebrities and maybe even people in their lives say, Christianity is not for Black people. And I think also American history, slavery contributes to this too. So a lot of people will say like Black people inherited Christianity through slavery. Before slavery, our ancestors were following their traditional religions and not this white man's religion. So there's just a lot of different things that have made this be the issue that it is today, but it's definitely something that anyone who is dealing in urban apologetics has encountered. It's a very common claim.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm excited to talk more about the urban apologetics and I think it's great that that was your topic at CIA too. And that's why like we're going to talk about Beyonce because when you had mentioned that Beyonce, like, she was talking about going down south, like you probably know the lyrics better than I do, but it's because you had mentioned them, like going down south to her roots and talking about spirituality, which I found like you're talking about with history and stuff. So there's probably some truth to them thinking that it would be a white man's religion, although we know that it's not, right? Um, so I want to like when you're looking at them going like her saying we're going back to our roots, you're talking about the difference between like Black people being like spiritual and the white people saying, oh, it's Christianity because they're saying it's a white man's religion. Christianity is. What does that say about like the identity crisis? Because you mentioned that in your presentation too. Like we have an identity crisis. And when I think identity crisis, like I'm thinking about the transgender issue because that one is like in front of us all day, every day, and you see these kids really conflicted. But this is another identity crisis that we need to be like looking at and addressing. Can you expand like more on what you think about
Yeah,
that?
Because of our nation's history, and Black has been so like just something that people didn't want to be associated with. I don't want to be Black. I don't like being Black. But now the reverse is happening. So people are finally starting to say, you know what? I'm not going to get a chemical relaxer. I'm going to let my natural hair grow out. I'm not going to be bleaching my skin trying to be light skinned. I'm going to embrace being dark skinned. That is fine. But because they're looking at Christianity through a racist lens, through the lens of slavery, they have redefined Christianity. They ignore the principles of Christianity. They ignore the history of Christianity and are now using that to explore other religions, which exploring other religions, at least to know what they mean and what they're about, that's okay. But to abandon Christianity because you believe it's a white man's religion when it's not even a white man's religion or a Black man's religion, that's not what Christianity is about. Christianity is about reconciliation with God, right? That
Right.
Jesus died for our sins, resurrected. He did that for us. And, we can look forward to living eternal life with him. That's what Christianity is, but people have turned it into something else. It's sad.
Yeah. No, it definitely is. And it seems like because they don't want their like reputation or their identity to be attached to Christianity, then they feel like and it's not even Christianity, I guess. It's the false representation of it, like you said.
Right.
And so when they're equating it to, it was Christians who enslaved, the Black people, like, well, why would we want that? And so
Yeah.
because it's become such an issue in the last couple of years, it's brought a complete negative stigma on it. And I think that's where Christians need to be aware. Like when you hear somebody saying Christianity is a white man's religion, this is where it's coming from. It's coming from the history of the US and people misunderstanding. Like, I think it was Frederick Douglass. I was actually reading one of his, and you probably, I'm sure you're aware of it, but this was posted in the Gospel Coalition, and they were basically saying like he understood, which I love. Frederick, you have to read Frederick Douglass in school, or we didn't have to. I chose to read him because you get to pick like within history, who do you want to read about, and what report do you want, And I don't know, out of everyone, like I love his story because he learned to read and write, and he not only learned to read and write, the man is an intellectual. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like to learn to read and write is one thing, but to be able to articulate, that's a whole other level of intellect. So I just want people to understand that that's really the progress that he made and how he overcame his circumstances is amazing. But he was saying basically, like, I know that this Christianity that I've seen represented through slavery and through these men is not Christianity. That's not
Right.
representative of Christ. So basically you have two different representations. You have the real Christianity through Christ Jesus, and then you have this false representation. And he was saying, I'm not going to equate them saying they're Christians to the true message and gospel of Christianity, what Christ has done. And so he calls it a deceitful Christianity, a deceitful one, to call the religion of this land Christianity. And that's the sad thing about, America itself is like, is people calling that, but we're doing it today too. We're calling ourselves Christians, but not even living up to it. Just like in history, like 65% of Americans claim to be Christians, 6% have a biblical worldview. It's easy to call ourselves Christians, but we don't even think biblically. Like, we're going to, just like you said, like when Black people are now exploring these other religions, well, everyone who calls themselves Christians, mostly that's what they're doing. They're synchronizing like all of these other belief systems and putting them into one thing. So we all have a skewed understanding of what it is. And why do we have that skewed understanding? Because people don't represent Christ very well. It's he lets us be the messengers in this world, and we're just not doing a very good job of it. So what do you find, like, as a result of people who say Christianity is a white man's religion? Because there are some white people who say that too. I mean, and sometimes I look at some of the white people touting these messages. I'm like, you guys are like you guys are like making it so worse. Like, You know what I
You're part
mean?
of the problem. You are part.
Exactly. Definitely. It's like they think that they're doing good and it's like, man, you're just not, you know. Um so what is the problem with that? What is what is coming of it, and where is it going to keep going if we don't fix it?
Oh, that's a good question. I think some people are starting to realize that, first of all, when you embrace a false religion, it's gonna come to a dead end. Like false religions are not all they're cracked up to be, especially some of these African spiritual traditions. I was watching a video of, I think it was Azalea Banks. She says she practices brujeria, which is like a form of witchcraft, but she's doing animal sacrifices in the closet of her New York apartment. This was from several years ago. I don't know if she still does this thing, but she posted it on social media. And I'm like, this is sick. Like, there's dried up blood in your closet. And you're telling me that this is a better belief system than Christianity? I don't think so. And even if you want to go to the Hebrew Israelite side, which I know we'll talk about that some more here soon, but Hebrew Israelites are all about law keeping. So where Christianity offers you grace, like God, Jesus on the cross accomplished everything for us. They're making you go back to the Mosaic law, even though it's impossible to keep all 613 or 614 plus laws. We can't do that, but they think that they can do it. So they'll say, I'm not going to eat pork. Or I'm going to obey the Sabbath. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. And we all know, like, really, are y'all really doing that? Like, are all of y'all actually circumcised? I mean, I can't. I don't want to know.
Yeah, don't
Like,
answer that question.
yeah, I'm just, like these false religions, they don't offer you hope. A lot of times women they just are mistreated in those types of pharisaical type religions. And then if you're into witchcraft and stuff, like, I can imagine the demonic influence that people are opening themselves up to when they start practicing those types of things. So it's not a solution. It's just you just working to receive salvation or some type of happiness in life. But it's sad because I was reading an article or so about like why people get caught up in these things. And some of it is identity crisis. A lot of women who are caught up in the African spiritual traditions, they struggle with same-sex attraction, because a lot of them have received abuse, whether that was abuse in church or abuse in their family. So they're saying, like, my identity as a female, like, I don't want to be associated with a man. I want to be with a woman. So it's amazing to see that, because Christianity has these rules on sexual morality, that, okay, if I can't be with a woman and be in this religion, then I'll just gravitate to a religion that accepts my same-sex attraction. So there's all different types of things going on.
Yeah.
I don't know if that answers your question.
No, that's good. That's good. And I also read too, where you have the millennials and Gen Z don't want to be associated with Christianity either, because they're hearing these things about, the history of the US and it being, oppressive and things like that, even today. So that's why you have more of these generations identifying as the nuns. Like, I'm not going to be affiliated with any religion. But at the same time, it's like, are you a complete atheist? Even atheism itself is such a small percentage of people, of the actual population. And I don't think it was so the next generation will know, with McDowell and Wallace, I think it was George Barna's American Worldview Inventory that also said, even though they aren't claiming a religion, they're still very spiritual. And that's what people get. They mix up like spiritual and religious or believing in God. But you can be spiritual and, like you said, delving into like satanic worship.
Yeah.
Is that like, okay, so question two, Beyonce too, you kind of see this progression over time where it looked like it's almost like Miley Cyrus too. Miley Cyrus was on Oprah Winfrey like years ago, and she said Ephesians 6 was her favorite chapter of the Bible and all that. And then all of a sudden, like, you just see this progression of Miley Cyrus just going downhill, where renouncing her faith. It almost seems like Beyonce has done that too. But then Beyonce had done, people were like, oh, what's that triangle? Like, I don't know. Do you remember that? Like, I think it was a Super Bowl or something.
Yeah, the Illuminati stuff, those rumors, I'm sorry. It's like on one hand, I'm glad that people can recognize that Beyonce is not representing Christianity, but then it's also gotten so loopy because you have a lot of people, some of them Christians, some of them I think are just they're just looking for any conspiracy theory online, but these videos start to be more about Beyonce being demonic than about, preaching the gospel or like,
Right.
things that actually matter. But there has been a transition from the beginning of her career to now, because I can remember when she was still with Destiny's Child, and like on their earlier albums, they would always have gospel medleys on there. And Beyonce did claim to be a Christian, but it seems like I don't know if Jay-Z has anything to do with this. This is all speculation, but people are like, since he's kind of always had an axe to grind with Christianity and
Mm.
just released songs that were horrible. They say his name is Jehovah, because like Hova, because he wants to be God himself. So it's interesting to see now, 20 years later into her career, that she's releasing songs like Black Parade. That's the song that I referenced in my CIA presentation, where she said, I'm going back to the South where my roots ain't watered down. But she's pretty much saying, like, I ascribe to African spiritual traditions, which is the particular one she's talking about is Yoruba or the Ifa tradition. And there's a lot of other celebrities who have been associated or affiliated with this. One of them is Ayanna Van Zant, who was like, I think she's buddy buddy with Oprah Winfrey, but she kind of syncretizes. She sounds Christian in a lot of
Mhm.
stuff, but then she
Mm.
also like says some weird spiritual stuff. So anyway, it's just like, that's interesting. But yeah, Beyonce seems to also now have an axe to grind with Christianity, and it's sad because Yoruba, like there's no plan of salvation. This is what I don't understand with these false religions. Like, what good is it for you? How does this help? But I do believe that because Beyonce has become this iconic figure, I guess she would be like our generation's Michael Jackson. Who
Mm.
knows? Maybe she'll kind of surpass him in fame. But people literally worship this woman. It's crazy and it's
Yeah.
sad. So I think because she has said, I'm into this stuff now, and Christianity is the white man's religion, that it's trendy. I'm gonna
Yeah.
walk away from what seems to be white so I can do what Beyonce's doing because I just want to be like Beyonce. It's weird.
Yeah. Yeah, that's another good point. It's not like people are like, let me go check this religion out and see how it's going to benefit me. Yeah, that it's these people have so much influence. So you had also mentioned on your CIA presentation, like I think you played or you had quoted, I can't remember exactly. I think it was from Good Times. I can't remember the TV show
Oh,
where you're like,
Evan.
yeah, where he was like, the first thing I saw, or that I can remember is like my mom, dad, and the white Jesus or something like that, a picture of white Jesus, which is also very strange, like that people would, I think with you said that Jesus was like white with blue eyes.
Yeah.
It's like, again, he's from the Middle East. So yeah. But then you said they overcorrected, like people would overcorrect and they make a black Jesus. It's almost like this feuding. I want Jesus to be black or I want Jesus to be white, and it's like, but who is Jesus really? Like he's God. And it's like, it's so crazy to me that that is such a representation of the reality of what's happening amongst people, And so you had also said like if Christians would show the true, like for even for black people, like the people that represent Christianity well,
Mhm.
what do you think, like what do you think that that would do for just Christians in general?
Well, I think learning church history is good for everyone, whether you are an American Christian, a Black American Christian, a white American Christian, a Messianic Jew, like all these types of things, right? Just learning church history, because to me, debunking the whole Christianity is a white man's religion is not really very hard to do, because like you said, Jesus was from the Middle East. He was a Jew. He has African people in his lineage. It doesn't mean that he was jet black or, looking like Michael Seaver on Growing Pains. We don't know what Jesus looked like.
Yeah.
To focus on the amount of melanin that he has is to miss the whole point of the gospel, right? But one of the things that I focused on in the presentation was showing like, hey, Christianity did not start in America. It didn't start in Europe. There's a lot of Christian history on the continent of Africa. A lot of our church fathers were African. Again, we don't know what any of these people look like because, I mean, people groups were moving all over the place. I
Yeah.
don't know what any of these folks look like, right? But to say that Christianity is just all for white people, by white people, to suppress white people, that's just not really what the historical record shows. I mean, Augustine was African, Tertullian, Origen. I mean, these are heavy hitters, people who were very foundational in helping to frame Christian orthodoxy. Of course, they didn't like create Christianity, but they helped to like put up the fences, like, what is Christianity? How do we articulate it? Like, what is our faith about? A lot of those people early on were African. So I think it's good to point to that, because then you're not saying, you know, you should just believe this just because I want to believe it. But no, like, to answer your question, it's not a white man's religion. Like, Africans were there too, right from the very beginning.
Right. And that's good for everyone. It's good for white, black, brown, everyone to see that everyone has contributed to. The thing is, Matthew 28:19 is go out and preach the gospel and make disciples of all nations. And that's the thing that gets me. I actually had someone a couple years ago, I was on her podcast, and she's a black podcaster. And so I was on her podcast. She had a partner and stuff. And then when the George Floyd thing had happened, she had said something about, well, I'm sure you have a good influence for all the white people that you like, you're a good influence for them, meaning like your discipleship stops at the race that you are. And I'm like, wait, Jesus said all nations, like we have to care about everyone, all of us. And that's the problem with the church in general. Like, you know, it's crazy to me how we don't, if we had the church history and we talked about the contributors to the very faith that you believe, the reason you're even sitting in the church itself talking about these things is because everyone of all different colors has contributed. And that's just so important to talk about. And it's a shame. It's a shame that we don't, you know? So go ahead. You look like you might.
Oh, that was good. I mean, and even if you fast forward to like slavery and post-slavery, you see a lot of African Americans, like you said, Frederick Douglass, who are a part of the abolitionist movement, and plenty of white Christians were a part of the abolitionist movement. I mean, what is the atheistic worldview have to say about slavery? Who cares, right?
Right,
Why should
right.
I care? Survival of the fittest, like the strongest are going to survive. I even did a video a few months ago about how atheist scientists took an African and put him in a zoo exhibit as an animal. And it was Black Christians who went to the newspapers and who you know, were like, hey, this is wrong. This is a human being. So Christians have been very influential in stopping this institution of slavery. I mean, American history, even American church history, it's definitely not all pretty. Some of it is really bad. But had it not been for the American church, like, who's to say that slavery would have ever ended?
Yeah. Yeah. It's so you should write you should write like an apologetics history book on this. I'm just giving you some ideas for content.
And there's so many people, like I got a list of books here of people who have been studying this for so much longer than I have, that I mean, they've got receipts on receipts on receipts. But yeah, like American church history, even with its flaws, it's beautiful to see how the message of the gospel influenced the abolitionist movement. I'm very grateful for it. I mean, even the civil rights movement.
Yeah.
You know, I'm saying all these people had great theology, because some of them was probably like, okay, that's not really good, but it still goes back to their Christian worldview, or at least somewhat of a Christian worldview, influencing their the reason that they wanted to help stop all this racism and injustice. So yeah.
Yeah, true. I mean, the thing is that Christians, the whole being created in the image of God and having intrinsic human value, that's a Christian, fundamental Christian belief, where no matter who you are, you look at that unborn baby, person of any color, you know, male or female, handicapped or mentally disabled, whatever it is, your value is not diminished at all. And so it's beautiful, and at the same time it's also flawed, because God uses humans in our imperfection to be the vessels, and sometimes we just don't always do it right, but God's word never fails, and it always will continue to move through eternity, through time, while we're here on this earth. So it's like, on one hand, it's like, thank God that he's still faithful, because he's the one who gets that message to go through, even when it's through people like us. So here's my other question. I want you to talk about urban apologetics, because I want people to truly understand what that is, like what that means, what it entails, and all that. So I don't know which question should come first. So maybe you will help me with this, because I'm not so sure that white people are going to do a very good job of urban apologetics, because if Black people are already like, it's a white man's religion, why would I want Christianity? And then you have this white person coming over there. It's almost like I'm not going to listen, you know what I mean? Because it's a white man's religion. So you tell me what you think about, like, is that true? Or are you going to be as effective?
I think anybody who is preaching the gospel can be effective, because it's ultimately it's the spirit of God. You know, he uses all of us. For me, I feel that same struggle, but in a different way.
Okay.
Because as a woman, it's very hard for me to have meaningful discussions with the Hebrew Israelite group, a very masculine group that does not value women in the way that the scriptures tell them that women should be valued. So for them, it's like, how can you say anything? You're a woman. But you know what? I'll get on YouTube or TikTok or whatever, and I'll say what I got to say, and I'll just, let the cards fall where they're made, because the truth is going to be the truth, whoever it comes from. But I think, using some of these tactics that our friend Greg Cope, I like to say our friend, I don't know, Greg Cope.
He is our friend.
Right? He's our brother in Christ. I had
That's right.
At CIA, he's so knowledgeable, and I love hearing him speak and hearing Frank Turk speak and all these other great people. But just asking people questions. What do you mean by that? Like, when you say this, like, let these people defend their own worldview. That's something I'm like trying to put into practice more, instead of always being the one to hold like the burden of proof, because man, it's powerful. Like, I don't have to be the one to provide all this evidence when you're making the claim. But I said all that to say, you can be effective in urban apologetics, even as a white person. Like, David Wood, he does, his ministry is more so geared towards Islam. He's like one of the best, strongest Christian apologists against Islam. My friend Vocab Malone, he is like he probably knows more about Hebrew Israelism than anybody on YouTube right now. So these are white folks, right? But they're still doing the thing. So it's possible, but I do think you have to be sensitive, maybe a little bit more sensitive, if you're gonna embark on that particular area, because it can be challenging. And I think a lot of that goes back again to our history, and people are very they're weary of white Christians, white Christianity. The racial divide in our country has not made that any easier. And I'm sure all that's from Satan, right? He'll use whatever he can to get people's focus away from the truth. But I do think, if you read a few books like one of Black Man's Religion, Craig Keener, Craig Keener is one of our favorite, New Testament apologists. Thomas Olden is now deceased. He wrote a book called How Africa Shaped the Christian Mind. So there's people who don't look like me who are still very much well aware and informed on these topics. Is it a challenge? Yes. Is it impossible? No.
That's good. That's really good. That's really good too, because if you love others like God wants you to, you're going to be like, let's just go love on them and tell them about Jesus. And like you said, I mean, I feel like things are always intimidating. You get up in front of the CIA people and give a presentation. It's intimidating. It's intimidating to share the gospel with people you don't know in general. But at the same time, you want to be the person to carry it's good news for a reason, and we want to do that. So those are some great points that you made, and I love that. That's a great encouragement. So what is urban apologetics? Okay, first of all, like Hebrew, okay, that is awesome. So do these people come on your YouTube and are they like, you're a woman, why are you teaching this? Because it's like, why are you on the YouTube? No one's making you listen to it.
Some of them are very smart in, how they can maneuver away from the gospel. It's like, wow, doing all these gymnastics. I'm appalled and impressed at the same time that you can do all this to get around the truth of the gospel. But yeah, they have said some pretty wild, mean things to me. But I could say the same thing about atheists and other people that disagree with me, right? Hebrew Israelites, we just have a different type of relationship. But yeah, that group, oh my goodness, that group is very difficult to talk to. And if you think that you're just going to go and show them a few scriptures in Galatians about how there's no Jew or Gentile, or, disprove that they are not the true Hebrews of the Bible, I'm just saying it is a true work of the Holy Spirit if one of them actually listens to you. It takes time. It takes conversation after conversation. Like, it's definitely not something that's going to happen overnight. So if you ever encounter someone in your personal life who was caught up in this group, just be prepared to walk a very slow path with them, because the intricacies that it takes to just break down those walls, it's tough. It's tough. I even have people in my family who have kind of started to embrace it, not like on the militant side, because there are different sides of it. And I'm sorry, I probably should explain what Hebrew Israelism is.
Yeah, I'm like so intrigued right now. So are they in America, or are they, because they're not in?
Yeah,
Okay.
they're in America.
So is
And
this like a religion?
it is a religion. It is a religion. They believe that the descendants of the transatlantic slave trade are the true Jews, the true Hebrew people in the Bible, and they use Deuteronomy 28 as a proof text to prove this. So, Deuteronomy 28 says, if you do what I tell you to do, you'll be blessed. If you don't do what I tell you to do, all these curses are going to come on you. So they'll point to curses like, slavery, and I can't even remember all the curses in Deuteronomy 28, but in a nutshell, they use that as a proof text to try to prove that they are physical descendants of the Hebrew people. There's really no history to support this other than the fact that there are Black Jews in the Limba tribe, I believe it is. But to say that all African Americans come from the Limba tribe that's not proof. It's not provable. But
so is this what, like, Nick Cannon? Is it Nick Cannon who said something like that? Is that what?
I'm not sure if he's still like, just
Okay.
on that religion. I think he's just kind of like on a religious buffet, like, okay, I'll take a little bit of that. That sounds good too.
Yeah.
A lot of communities do that kind of weird stuff, but ultimately it's about Black people being the true Jews, law keeping, and anything that looks Christian or sounds Christian, usually they'll kind of reject it. So Jesus's real name is not Jesus, it's Yahusha. A lot of them don't even like Yeshua. Like, it's got to be Yahusha or Yahawashai, something like that. So if you start to hear those types of words, that's like a buzzword within the Hebrew Israelite community. Things like the Trinity, the deity of Christ, the cross, some of them, they don't want to wear a cross. They'll wear a Star of David, but they will not go anywhere near a cross. They see the cross as pagan. And religious holidays like Christmas, Christmas is pagan. So those types of things. And depending on which group you talk to, and there's just so many different subgroups within them, but the One West group, that's like, those are the more militant ones that you'll see in downtown metropolitan areas. Some people say they dress like Power Rangers. Like, I don't want to pick at them, but I can see why they would compare them to Power Rangers, with belts and all different types of things and fringes. But then you have another group that would say they just look like your average person, might even go to your church. And this is what concerns me about them, is because a lot of them are starting to infiltrate churches, particularly Black churches, to preach this. So it's causing church splits, and people are starting to turn away from the gospel and embrace Hebrew Israelism because they think, oh, we found the true way to follow the Bible, which is law keeping and Sabbath keeping and all this. But on that side, they would say, you don't have to be a Black person or a descendant of the Hebrew people to be saved in the end. But the One West, they're like, if you're not Black or Native American or Hispanic, you are done. When Yahawashai comes back, it is over for you. So it's a pretty, an interesting religion.
So do they believe in like the first 5 books of the Bible, like the Pentateuch, or where do they stop with the Old Testament?
It depends. Some of them would be Tanakh only. Some of them would embrace the New Testament also, but most of them do not like the Apostle Paul. And I'm sure you can guess why, right? Because the Apostle Paul preached grace. There's no Jew nor Gentile. Like, there's nothing we can do to earn our salvation. Jesus did that for us. So they'll say, like, Paul went off, or Paul, was not preaching the same gospel as Jesus. So, yeah.
So that's your main, is that your main focus, or
It's I go in like different seasons, it depends.
yeah,
So when I first started on YouTube, I was heavy on the Hebrew Israelite stuff and still learning, as like I'm still learning. I mean,
when aren't we?
oh my gosh, it just seems like every day I'm hearing something new, a new argument, and sometimes they can be really like just difficult or complex to me, because you're having to go back into the Old Testament and figure out context. And sometimes you have to learn, like, what do these words mean in the original language, so I can know exactly what this person was saying. So it can be just tedious. But I also had a season where I was focusing on secret societies, particularly Black fraternities and sororities and Freemasonry. So that's still kind of my baby. I still
Yeah.
love talking about that. So if I had to say like the two main issues that I talk about more than anything, it probably would be the secret societies and Hebrew Israelism.
Yeah. Wow. That is a task. I mean, yeah, you're throwing yourself in there with it as a woman, and they're like, excuse, because that is some strict law abiding stuff. That's crazy. So how is that different than urban apologetics? Like, I guess urban apologetics, you said, is like more inner city and
Yeah,
things.
so urban apologetics is more like the umbrella term. So it doesn't have to be about cults that particularly affect the Black community, but it seems like those cults are within urban apologetics. So really that's just saying, like, we're focusing on cults like the Hebrew Israelites, like the Nation of Islam, or Orthodox Islam, or Kemetic science, or African spirituality. And I'm not an expert, really, I'm not an expert on any of these things, but I think I know more than probably your average Christian, just because I've started to read and do research on this type of stuff. But yeah, those types of religions that are really geared towards the Black community,
Mhm.
um, that's really what urban apologetics is gonna focus on.
So are you speaking around about these things anywhere? Like, do you get to go into the churches and bring
I'm
this
not
up?
doing that yet. I think in the future I probably should start to do that, because it is becoming more of an issue. And I think people are finally starting to be like, you know what, maybe the apologetics isn't just for a select group of folks.
Mhm.
Maybe all of the church should be more equipped to have these conversations. It doesn't mean you have to know everything about everything, but just having basic knowledge, like, again, knowing a little bit of African church history, like, that could knock down some of this Christianity is the white man's religion type of stuff.
Yeah.
Making sure you know what the gospel is can help you have a meaningful conversation with people who are caught up in these different groups.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, honestly, like, it's so crazy how there are people who have like their niche in apologetics. They're going down these different avenues, and I don't know all of them either. I feel like as an apologist, as a Christian in general, we're always learning, we're always studying, and the culture is always changing something. It's always the same problem, right? It's just got a different spin on it, different wording or something. And it's like, how do we handle that? So I just think that what you're bringing to the table is so needed. Like, I love your idea of like the church history and really having Christians dive into that. Like, early church history is so important anyways, but it's also important to be honest with, look at the backgrounds and where all of these people came from to contribute to the information that we have today, the knowledge that we can have. The church that I go to now here in South Carolina, now that we moved, they actually do discipleship classes, and they've done early church history. And I've never been to a church that has done, a whole, I think it was what, 8 weeks or something on early church history. And maybe it was longer, maybe it was 12. I mean, I think was quite long because we were going over these different periods of time throughout history and stuff. But I was like, oh my gosh, like this is so needed. It's so needed for us to understand what the church has gone through, how God shows his faithfulness through different people in the church, how we work together as the body of Christ on this same mission mindedness to say, hey, we don't care. We are here to fulfill the Great Commission of Matthew 28:19, and we're all locking arms to do this together. It's like, that's really what it shows you with early church history. It's like, we're just this little speck on that timeline, and we get to be key players in this, like they've all been throughout history. So I love that you mentioned that. I hope that you'll have more to do with that.
Yeah, it's a privilege. Like we live in the West where there's not very many, there's not punishment, at least at this time in history, for those of us who want to share our faith online. I pray that it continues to be that way,
Me
right?
too. Me too.
But you look back and you're like, how are these people like sacrificing their lives in the most egregious, horrific ways for the gospel? But we're afraid to have conversations, myself included. Sometimes I like completely choke and I'm like, oh man, God, I completely like wimped out in this moment. But these people, you just read their stories and it's so encouraging. In the CIA presentation, I talked about Perpetua and Felicity, which I didn't even know they were African, right? These are two women who they were moms, and they were young, I think in their late teens, early 20s. And they're like, I'm going to die for my faith and I'm going to die with some dignity, with my head held high. Like it is what it is. 2000 years later, or 1800 years later, however long it's been, I'm just so encouraged by that story. Like, Lord, whatever happens, whether somebody calls me a bad name on the internet or, God forbid something worse happens, this is worth it. Like we are a part of such a unique and like cool group of people. And it's all because of what Jesus Christ did. I don't know what, I don't think that answered any question that you asked, but
It
yeah,
was perfect.
I'm fascinated.
That is a perfect way to end. I love that. And it's true. I mean, that's what the early church history does. It encourages us to keep carrying that baton no matter what. And you said it best. We have no excuse. Who cares if they call us a name online? We are to be bold and courageous and pray to God that we always are. And we never have to. I don't want to know how strong I can be. I don't want to know how bold I have to be, Lord, but I better take advantage of that in the time that we're in now when there's not much to risk. I mean, these other people who have sacrificed their lives, they would be like, you guys are wimps. Come on, rise to the occasion. So how can we find you, follow you, and listen to all the good things you put out?
Sure. Okay. So I am on YouTube. My YouTube name, well, really, this is my name on all social media platforms, Miss Tytus 2. Titus is spelled with a Y. So Tytus and then the number 2. On Instagram, I'm just Miss Tytus. And on TikTok, I'm just Miss Tytus. So those are the 3 main places that I kind of put videos out.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I'll definitely have all that in the show notes. So if anybody is trying to find Ty, trust me, you want to look her up. She's fun. She's so relatable, as you can see, and she's knowledgeable in what she does. So we need to learn more, and she's one of the best to learn from. So if you have any questions for her, you can get a hold of her, start following her, find her, and look in the show notes for all of that information. And if you have any questions for me, you can email me at hello@shandafulbright.com, and I'll catch you on the next one.